Welcome to everybody who is here in this space and those that are online. It's been a long day for many of us, so this is the final event for today. My name is Julia Strutz. I will be moderating the next 90 minutes of our panel discussion. We organized this panel in response to the escalating situation in the US and wanted to address the enthusiasm expressed by some politicians in Germany and elsewhere that all these excellent US scholars would now join their higher education systems. We thought there was no reason for joy, and that's why we are today here with this topic. For tonight's discussion, I would like to welcome and introduce our panelists. First of all, we have Felicia Kompio, who is a member of the executive board of the Berlin branch of the GEW, Educators and Science Workers Union. This is not a paid position, just to mention this. She's here as an activist and a volunteer. Sometimes we think that all trade unionists have great jobs. It's also activism like ours. She deals with working and studying conditions in the Berlin university system, the structures that enable abuse of power and the effects of current budgetary policy. As a historian, she has experienced the system from various perspectives, including as a student assistant, a research assistant, and a scholarship holder. So she's been everywhere. I would then like to introduce Yannick Giovanni Marshall, who joins us online tonight. He specializes in anti-colonial Black thought, political exile, and dissent. He taught contemporary Black thought at the California Institute of Arts before fleeing the United States amid the escalating suppression of Black studies, protest, and academic freedom. As I said, he's joining online tonight because of travel restrictions. Finally, I would like to welcome Asli Vatansever, who for me is here in a triple role tonight. She's on the one hand a sociologist specializing in work and social stratification, focusing on precarious academic labor. She has also been dismissed from her position as an associate professor and banned from public service in Turkey for signing the Academics for Peace petition in 2016. And finally, she is the author of an article about abuse in academia that's, let's say, sent shockwaves through the Berlin higher education landscape. Let's welcome them, please. Despite our efforts to actually find somebody who could speak on behalf of higher education institutions, of administrations, we didn't really manage to invite anybody to this panel who could tell us a little bit more about what is happening in the German higher education system and their plans for protection of US scholars. This is why I'm taking the liberty today to speak to you about what they're actually planning. This is basically a little bit a summary of a desktop desktop, yes, that's what it's called, desktop research. Because I think we have all those that are following media, we have heard a lot of this enthusiasm. We heard of entire universities that were invited to have their exile campus in Germany, like Harvard should have an exile campus here. We heard that the international students who could no longer study in US institutions were invited to, of all places, Hong Kong, for instance, to continue their study there free of charge. But of the more concrete things, we actually don't know so many things. I would like to give two examples to sort of imagine a little bit what is currently discussed, not behind doors, I think, it's rather because it's really just in the making. And the first example I would like to give is from the EU that has just launched the Choose Europe for Science program, which is made by the European Commission and announced in May this year. It's a Marie Curie scheme with a budget of 22.5 million euros. Like many others, the Choose Europe for Science initiative initiative is also keeping a low profile on actually addressing rising authoritarianism, of the persecution of scholars, of endangered knowledge. It's not speaking about how gender studies are attacked, what happens to climate change in the US. This is not what they are speaking about, but they're using the following language. I would quote Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission, in her launch of this initiative, Choose Europe for Science. She says, "As threats rise across the world, Europe will not compromise on its principles. Europe must remain the home of academic and scientific freedom." So this is what they are saying when they are launching this initiative, and that was immediately applauded also by a quite important actor, I think, which is the network Inspire Europe, which is basically the network of institutions that are quite known to many of us. That's a network of, for instance, the Philip Schwarz Initiative, CARA, PAUSE, and similar organizations that many of us have been in contact with. So they are supporting the statement. Of course, they are asking for more funds and more support for scholars at risk, while supporting this program with the following words, and I'm quoting again, Inspire Europe's calls to Europe to champion academic freedom and protect academics at risk. So that's basically what is happening on this EU, EC level at the moment. A second example I would like to give is from Berlin, which is the place we are gathering tonight. And maybe I should say before that Berlin and Germany in generally have a quite long-lasting, long-time longing for a higher education that is similar to what is in the US. So oftentimes, and that's not extraordinary, or that's not, in this Germany is not alone, but if you say international scholars, actually what is implied is US scholars, right? That's similar in Berlin. That's why Berlin is called, for instance, the Boston at the Spree River. And that's sort of like the place to become. The answer to an inquiry at the Berlin City Parliament by a politician that's called Tobias Schulze in May about what is actually planned for US scholars that have to leave their country is actually quite open or outspoken to the situation, and I'm quoting my own translation. They are saying, "The plan is to show researchers of all status groups who are currently working in the US or who, given the current situation there, can no longer imagine pursuing a career in the United States, that Berlin is a research location with a high degree of academic freedom that offers excellent conditions for research in an international and cosmopolitan environment." To accomplish this task, that's also what is in the inquiry already. The Einstein Foundation is sort of like the subcontractor in this case. Again, an actor that many of us know, many of us have been fellows. So the Einstein Foundation was commissioned by the Berlin Senate to enroll a funding scheme for US scholars, which led, that's the first thing that happened, to a website that is called Berlin Calling. It's finally an English language website for the Einstein Foundation that offers actually quite some basic and important information for a scholar who would like to be in Berlin and stay here. But the language is really not about academic freedom or persecution or the cut down of specific knowledge. It rather prefers to stress that, and I'm quoting again, Berlin's real strength is its spirit of collaboration. Just 2 weeks ago, the Berlin Center for Education and Research, Cibora, announced that the Einstein Foundation will receive an additional 4 million euro in 2026-27 to accomplish this task, to attract, and that's the wording then, no longer about US scholars, but they are called now excellent international scholars, both professors and postdocs, which is surprising, I think, for anybody who is closer to what's happening in Berlin and following up, because it's not even a year ago that the very same amount, 4 million euros, have been cut from the budget of the Einstein Foundation. So it's take with one hand, give with the other, and maybe a small change in the profile, let's say. So, thank you for your attention, and sorry for my long explanations, but I thought this was necessary to basically start the discussion. My first question, dear Yannick, we are hearing a lot and read a lot about funding cuts applied to disobedient universities and research areas. Can you say us a little bit more about the situation in the US, both for scholars but also for your students? And are there actually already scholars leaving the US? And if there are people who are leaving, who is actually leaving?
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me. And there are people considering leaving. There are people excited about what is happening because they see it as an opportunity for a type of fascist takeover of all learning, of all philosophy, and making it the new normal. Whereas they have perceived some type of liberal bias, as they say, or even radical bias in the universities, the right or the conservatives and conservative students finally see this as a moment of their comeuppance. Obviously, for the people who have been in programs like Black Studies, like gender studies, ethnic studies, etc., they've come on campus as in a movement, in an activist struggle against the white supremacist culture of the university. So that's why there are protests or campus protests that kind of force their way onto being present on campus. And so for these people, they have always been in a struggle with the university, whether it is for better resources, better physical locations, better treatment, better respect for their disciplines, etc. They've always been a struggle. So it wasn't this type of liberal bias as the right or white supremacists would have believed. And so for us who are part of these minoritized disciplines, this moment is especially encouraging us off the campus plantation and elsewhere. Because for our students, we've always heard that campus police or campus security would raid dorms, would mistreat them, would usher people off of campus for not looking like students, etc. There's always been a violent oppression of Black and brown students on pretty much all campuses, private or public. But today it is different. There are, one, the obvious capitulation of university boards and presidents and academic leaders to the white supremacist government. Whether it is negotiating with them in order to kind of end DEI or EDI or diversity movements, or to just pay them off or put money into the government's coffers so that they can still retain their research fellowship, etc. So that symbolic move is very discouraging. But not only that, we have ICE, which is the immigrant police on campus. So there are students who are originally thought of as undocumented but safe, now afraid to go to school, or have parents or family who have struggled under ICE, so that their salaries have been cut, their financial stability has been cut. And so the conditions for students have been extremely dire if you are already from a vulnerable or marginalized class. Same with students, same with faculty members who teach things that are not officially approved, which are not coddling of white supremacist governance, are also thought to be in danger. Now, there are some university professors who have tenure or large names, and they can easily find, or relatively easily find, homes elsewhere. But for adjuncts and for junior professors and for professors that do not have a lot of family money, the options to be able to move is increasingly difficult. So all around, I would say it's just a very troubling situation.
Thank you very much. I would then like to pose my next question to Asli. Because we have experienced over the years actually different cohorts of persecuted and refugee scholars that came to Germany in order to continue their academic work. From your experience, and you have many years of them now, is Germany really the safe haven for all scholars at risk? And what's the difference for the different nationalities?
That is such a rhetorical question. Can you imagine me saying, yes, and we are immensely grateful? No. Let's start by there. No, Germany is not a safe haven, not for scholars at risk, not for its own domestic academic labor force, not for anyone, not now, not ever. But then again, nowhere is, and I'm not saying this to justify the situation in Germany, but I think we should actually drop the illusion of safe haven altogether and just start questioning why this myth of safety could persist as long as it did. You know, what makes us believe that there can be safe havens in terms of academic freedom or in terms of any other freedom and democracy in the first place? You know, the West celebrates itself, and it is a part of the Western self-conception, you know, being the bastion of academic freedom and champion of democracy and so on and so forth. But the moment unwanted voices are heard, the moment uncomfortable questions are asked, the glass cracks. You know, academic freedom is being displayed like a museum piece, polished, lit, celebrated, admired. But the moment you start asking uncomfortable questions in reality, the image shatters. And I said it elsewhere, and I'm going to say it again. Every state has its red lines, and Germany is not exempt from that. Every state has its red lines, and the most successfully authoritarian ones are actually those who pretend to not have any. You know, to say it with Chomsky, those smart states that limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but then allow very lively debate within that super narrow spectrum. And Germany is actually a prime example of that. Let's pause and remember what happened after October 7. You know, the very institutions that champion themselves as, you know, that profile themselves as champions of academic freedom started cracking down on dissent. And they did not hesitate to put themselves in the service of the government. And we have seen how professors and students who expressed solidarity with Palestine or who dared to ask uncomfortable questions about the war have been expelled, investigated, exmatriculated, disinvited, and so on and so forth. I mean, at this stage, we don't even need metaphors anymore. We have data. There's this study very recently published by Freie Universität Berlin. Maybe you heard of that. 85% of 2,000 survey participants have reported an increased sense of threat against academic freedom, an increased sense of self-censorship, fear of sanctions. And this is just a part of the story, but it's a very telling part. So when we say Germany is a safe haven, we must immediately ask for whom, in what sense, and safe from what, actually? Who are we trying to save here if the universities are in the service of the state in the first place? And that's a topic that I want to come back to later, actually. But I'm going to cut it short and say, when we think about why the safe haven myth has been able to survive for so long, I can think of two reasons, basically. First of all, we have to understand that we're living in a capitalist world economy where different parts fulfill different functions, and the main difference lies in the methods of labor coercion. And academic freedom, I mean, the curtailing of academic freedom is actually a method of labor coercion specific to the academic sector. The academic sector is not different than any other sector. It's a billion-dollar industry with a labor force that is subject to all types of exploitation and abuse. And curtailing academic freedom is actually a method of labor coercion. And the degree to which you can use violence in curtailing academic freedom depends on where you are within the world system. In the core countries, we know that it's basically done via more subtle mechanisms like market incentives, like, you know, making people dependent on short-term scholarships and dependent on feudal structures where a chairholder decides on the fate of entire departments. Whereas in wretched peripheral regimes like the one in Turkey or Afghanistan, you can of course afford to crack down more violently. So this is the main difference. And as long as it, you know, as long as Germany can compare itself to Turkey and Afghanistan, they can feel like they're better off. And another reason why Germany or nowhere is actually a safe haven for scholars at risk is, well, actually, I mean, the conditions whereby a scholar at risk or any international scholar enters an academic labor market makes a huge difference. I mean, a visiting professor from Harvard or Oxford is being welcomed here as an addition, as a contribution to scientific production. Whereas someone like me is seen as a liability, as a dependent, as, you know, someone whose qualifications are dubious and someone who can only be tolerated for a limited period of time. So safe haven for a short time maybe, and in a very conditional way, but not in the sense of really being able to finding your footing in the scientific community. And this is where we also have to draw the line between charity and solidarity. Most of the time, what Germany or any other host country offers is charity. And charity is conditional. Charity is patronizing. Charity says, you're here because I let you be here. Whereas solidarity is different. Solidarity says, your struggle is my struggle. I'm not helping you. I'm helping myself as well when I'm holding hands with you and when I'm fighting together with you. Charity demands conformity. Charity demands gratitude. Solidarity says, hey, let's fight together as equals. So, yeah, I mean, as long as we don't have solidarity, I don't think we can talk of any safe haven.
Thank you very much. I would like to turn to a champion of solidarity then, and ask my next question to Felicia, because I would be interested if you can contextualize what's happening or how you perceive this invitation to US scholars by the Berlin Senate, with the struggles that you are fighting in Berlin for better working conditions.
Thank you. And also, yeah, thank you, first of all, for having me. I think you and Asli as well have already touched on several points, but maybe I'll just give a quick glance at what is happening for Berlin universities right at the moment, which is funding cuts. So we're in the Berlin Parliament is in budget negotiations right now. And for the universities, those are basically already through because they are funded through a system that's called university contracts. And those have been renegotiated because the Berlin Senate last year closed those contracts with the universities, and then a couple of months later realized that they didn't have the money. So they just came back and said, we cannot fund this, we have to renegotiate. So we're looking at funding cuts. and also at the express plan to shrink the entire sector. So I'm talking about obviously the public universities right now. There are a lot of private universities, and that's obviously funding-wise different, but a big part of the Berlin university sector is public, and that's where our union is mainly active. So that's what I can speak to, and also where we can see the political program at play. So the plan is to shrink this entire sector by roughly 10% over the next years. And what we all know is when resources get smaller, then we have allocation conflicts, obviously. And in those conflicts, privilege will always come out on top. So what we already start to see is that these things work out. So what Asli already mentioned, like people on fixed term contracts, for example, are first to not get their contracts extended and so on, because when these universities try to cut on their costs, then labor costs are the easiest way to do that. So already the first people to feel the results of the cuts are those already in precarious positions. And we also see the attacks on programs like gender studies and what Yannick spoke a bit to. And also from my colleagues who are active in equality programs and, for example, women's representatives and so on, they also see already those problems that people who are already, being marginalized by the system are the first to feel the consequences. Also accessibility programs, for example. So when they try to, in construction and building, they try to get around regulations that make buildings accessible and stuff like that. And what we can also see, for example, there is this institution Studierendenwerk, which provides services for students from housing through the cafeterias and so on. And they also face cuts and will no longer be able to uphold their counseling services at the same level. So again, the places where people turn to find support, those are the places where we will see the results of those cuts. Maybe a quick look at what we see for the people working at the universities. For the admin staff, we've seen over the last years already a lot of intensification of the workload. So there's more, the work is more dense, basically. And they also, the universities struggle to find qualified staff because they are not very attractive places to go to work for, especially for admin staff. So fewer and fewer colleagues have to do the work, which again intensifies it. And yeah, positions are not filled again because of cuts. Then if someone leaves, you don't replace them. Which obviously leads to problems in the university's administration. Everyone who tried to get a job there and maybe made it to the agreement and maybe even got to sign a contract and then had to struggle to get their first month's salary because something was not working in the admin department, knows what I'm talking about. And obviously these things also then put pressure on academic staff who are also facing the same problems because of the cuts. We have fewer people doing more or less the same work. I mean, that's what the Senate now wants to quote unquote solve by shrinking the whole system. So we have fewer students for fewer academic staff. Yeah, so I think about the whole fixed term contract nightmare. I think we're getting to that in the next round, if I remember correctly. But yeah, so coming back to what we're here to discuss today. So there's plans to attract mainly US scholars, and I absolutely agree Asli, what you said about like the US scholars or the professor from Harvard is seen as a an addition, and people from many other places seen as like, yeah, we're doing charity for you. And I think a little bit like a different perspective on this, or like a different, the other side of this is that there is this idea by politicians that they have to show that we have an excellent, quote unquote, what they see as excellent academic system, and that's what they want to prize themselves with, and that is prioritized, and so that we're moving away from seeing higher education as part of a working democracy. So we need these places, and these places need to be open for scholars, but also for students. Whoever wants to can come study and so on. And we have seen this discourse that we have too many students. Not everyone is supposed to go to university and so on. So this political shift basically to talking about universities being this place of where the great minds, blah, 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 blah. You all know what I'm talking about. And that's what we, from a union perspective, see as the second major issue here. So one is the working conditions, obviously our core business, but on the other hand, it's really this being part of an attack on democracy. Yeah, maybe for now. So much more to say.
Thank you so much. I would like to give Yannick another opportunity to speak and ask you what you actually think about these invitations by other countries. Does this actually match the realities of what is necessary for scholars in the US who are under pressure also? That's, I think, a reality. Under pressure to change their topic, to leave the country, but at the same time being in the situation to be perceived as excellent, I imagine to be quite difficult also, again, as a scholar. So are all US scholars excellent, or are they at risk, or what do you think?
No, not all U.S. scholars are excellent. But not only that, I haven't received an invitation. And I don't know many in my circle who have received an invitation or know of these invitations at all. And and I would assume that is because there is it was spoken about of the different worlds. That there is the wretched of the earth type of world where it is napalm and batons that are beaten down in universities and students are shot, etc. And in the core, in the peerless core, etc., there are a much more sophisticated way of maintaining control. And I think that is true, but also in the university itself in the U.S., that there is part of the wretched of the earth that comes into the university as well. So that there are like these type of internal colonies inside of the university where professors who speak about Palestine or Black thought or anti-colonial traditions, etc., are not really seen as other professors who say similar things, but they might say things like democracy and climate change, etc. And so there is a hierarchy. There's almost a Jim Crow society in the university, where I would assume that people would invite the U.S. scholars that say things that are safe to the West and do not criticize the West, and have them on platforms, and these become the people who get invitations or know of them. And the people who say things entirely different or look like or still feel like the third world, just apparently present in the West, are still registered as people who do not belong and also do not get invitations and are not thought of as people who are, if anything, if they were to come at all, it would be an act of charity rather than an act of solidarity. So yes, there is a hierarchy inside of the U.S. and inside of how people think of academia, and which is reflected both in our treatment in the U.S. and also how the world perceives who we are. But also, I would imagine that for those of us who have been taken on the additional task of survival in the university, whether it is to be able to say that it is legitimate to speak about Black history, Caribbean histories, African histories, that additional labor, intellectual labor, to be able to kind of cite additional sources, do not rely on the canon, do extra things. That excellence that is built into the work of surviving the university, that does not register. And so that just becomes something that is just, well, if you expect to be there, you have to state yourself. You have to prove yourself. Whereas others who rely safely on the already established thoughts, who are not original, who could be comforted in the canon and in what is already flattering of the West, they do not have to do that actual labor of survival. They could just continuously repeat what's already been said. And I would suggest that those people who, even despite their privilege and despite their being flattered by the world, are less valuable in terms of just objective scholarly and academic rigor, just for the main fact that it is an entirely different project to think with a boulder on your back rather than to think in freedom and not only freedom but in respect and in legitimacy. So yeah, I would not say that all U.S. scholars are good, but I will also say that one of the reasons that they're not all good is because certain U.S. scholars are fed privilege since they were born, and others have to work to survive, and that kind of creates a different type of mentality.
Thank you very much. I would like to change the topic slightly and talk about the working conditions at the university again, and ask you, Asli, why do you think scholars at risk and also international scholars are especially prone to experience abuse in the university system? What needs to change in order to prevent this kind of abuse?
Well, the only way out is revolution, but I'm not going to start there. Well, I mean, why are endangered scholars more prone to everything that is negative at the universities? And how are the working conditions? I mean, this is a long topic and it is like my life story, actually. I would say because the system that they're hosted in is built on dependence. You know, short-term contracts, temporary visas, research funding tied to institutional affiliation and institutional support. These are not neutral instruments. You know, these are instruments of power. These are instruments, these are levers of control. And when it comes to at-risk scholars, people who can't go back safely to where they come from, they become chains. Don't get me wrong, I mean, precarity is there for everyone, and there's enough precarity for everyone. And it is pervasive, it is all-encompassing, and it's actually the method by which the entire academic system disciplines everyone, not just endangered scholars, not just displaced scholars, but its consequences, of course, fall unevenly on everyone, depending on your racial, ethnic, gender, background, or even political conviction, or even your research topic. And when it comes to endangered scholars who are at the margins of academia in the host environments anyway, they're of course more prone to the negative impacts of this because their institutional affiliation is even more precarious than their domestic counterparts, and they are inherently expected to be grateful and not touch upon uncomfortable topics, not do controversial research, not criticize the system that supports them, not bite the hand that feeds them. And, it starts with the expectation that they remain grateful no matter what. And it continues with the entrenched arrogance that someone who's not trained in Western institutions is inherently less qualified than someone who has Western degrees. And it continues with the expectation that at-risk scholars become experts on their own countries and nothing else, and so on and so forth. And it just entails a whole set of additional methods of suppression, which are more subtle, like, professional disregard, exclusion from networks, not being invited to lunches even with your colleagues at the department is a part of that, because you're not seen as their equal. You're not seen as a peer. You're just seen as a curiosity at best, or you don't exist. I mean, I know, especially, like, I was maybe relatively lucky enough to not have worked at bigger state universities in Germany, but just institutions that were affiliated with universities. But I know from many at-risk scholars who were hosted by those assembly line huge state universities, and they had 5 years of DFG grants, and they they remained invisible in their own departments. They were like, nobody even knows my name, and nobody even asks me what I'm doing. And even if they do, it's just how interesting, and that's it. And in my presence, everybody speaks German, and I don't understand a word, for example. This is something that I hear a lot from many at-risk scholars. So even these are actually subtle forms of disregard. And I don't think we can call it abuse, but it's part of a bigger picture that is inherently Eurocentric and that is inherently based on relations of dependence. Well, what must change? I think, first of all, the West should stop jerking off on its own image and stop congratulating itself on being the bastion of academic freedom, which it is not. And we have seen it on multiple occasions, especially in a very lively way after October 7. So stop with that already. And second of all, I think the risk industry needs a reality check. I'm not denying that the risk scholarships, those temporary fellowships, actually provide a very valuable exit point into host academic environments, but they're certainly not enough. And in a system where, like in Germany, for example, where 92% of the domestic academic labor force works on fixed-term contracts, you cannot think, you can't possibly think that a 2-year fellowship would save lives. So I think this is a very structural problem, and it needs to be addressed as such. And I think GEW is doing a great job in there. So thank you for that. But there's a long way to go, and we all know that. And yeah, last but not least, there's one more point that I wanted to touch upon, which is our understanding of academic freedom. I think we have an inherently incomplete conception of academic freedom, which only focuses on lack of political oppression. And this is something that my colleague Aysuda Köleman, who is also with us tonight in the audience, We have been talking about this on many occasions. We also wrote about this together. The understanding of academic freedom that is currently in circulation also in all those one-dimensional academic freedom indexes is based on an idea of, if there is political oppression, there is no academic freedom. And if there's no overt political oppression, then there's academic freedom, which is a very, simplistic way of looking at things. I think we have to find a way to redefine academic freedom as a capability. And we have to reconceptualize it as a positive freedom that actually enables people to do something, not just as a protective mechanism, not just as a decorative principle, but as a living, breathing thing. And while we're at it, I think we should also question the tenure-oriented nature of academic freedom, because the predominant understanding of academic freedom actually refers to state protection. And in many countries, it only protects those who have tenure, who have a civil servant status. And the majority of the academic workforce, like 92% in Germany, 75% in the US, 68% in the UK, to give you a couple of examples, or 45% in Italy, does not have tenure and will probably never will. I think DGB has a statistic. In Germany, only 5% of PhD holders have a prospect of tenure one day. And this is for the domestic academic labor force. So if you're excluding 92% of this, what kind of an academic freedom are you talking about? So these are the things that really need to be addressed at a deeper structural level than what is being done by the risk industry at the moment.
Thank you very much. My next question goes in a very similar direction, and that is the relation between academic freedom and the working conditions at the same time. I would like to make a provocation, maybe for a change. Why the hell do scholars working at universities or who wish to work at universities need better working conditions than, for instance, people working in logistics or who are working in civil society organizations where, again, fixed-term contracts are the absolute rule?
Well, they don't. We all obviously need better working conditions. So that's the definitely the solidarity part, where, I represent a union that organizes education workers and researchers, but we have our sister unions under the umbrella of the DGB, and those are organizing, for example, those sectors that you mentioned. But to stick with why we need good working conditions in academia, I would actually like to pick up on something that Asli just said, because I absolutely agree with what you said. I just wanted to add that specifically to the German situation, we have this very very steep hierarchy between the what in German parlance is called a professor, so the tenured chair holders, and they basically they have small kingdoms basically. There is no one to tell them who can tell them what to do. Plus, they always hold the majority as a group. They always hold the majority in all university bodies, decision-making bodies, and that is something that we try as a union, and as many other people active in the field try to change. The problem is that it is reinforced by the Constitutional Court. So which speaks to this weird understanding of the freedom of research and the freedom of science. That is, I mean, this freedom is enshrined in the German constitution, but the way the Constitutional Court from the 70s until this summer, we're still a bit in shock, to be honest. The way it was interpreted is basically that this freedom is tied to this university as an institution, and this university has to be run by the professors. So basically, at the end of the day, the professors are the ones with the academic freedom, and everyone else is just basically there to serve them. It's really, you can start using feudal vocabulary here. Just because that's again, there was one decision this summer, and we're still a bit questioning what to do. The problem with the working conditions is that obviously people who are not just in this sense, not the holders of academic freedom, but are in this situation of precarity and dependence, which is, I think, the most important concept here to look at, are obviously not in a position to do the critical work that is, I would say, one of the main reasons why a society needs to support and uphold a university and an academic system. So as a society, we need research because we need a place where the status quo can be criticized in whatever field we're talking about. And those people have no expectation of being able to lead a life and fund their life and be reasonably safe. How can they provide this service to society, basically fulfill this function, fulfill this role in society? And as the GEW, because as I said, we organize researchers, but also all educators. There is like one thing is for the students and researchers at universities, but also other educators are educated at university to then go out and be primary, secondary school teachers and so on and so forth. So this also then bleeds out into how we educate next generations. And if the future teachers cannot develop their own understandings and so on in an environment where they can think critically and express themselves critically, how can they then help us educate the next generation to hopefully work on really making democracy a thing at some point? Yeah, I mean, that all sounds maybe a bit conceptual, but that's what we're talking about at the end of the day, is we want democracy, and I think without space for critical thinking, that's not going to work. And that is the idea for the academic world. And we're not making that happen at the moment. We're cutting down on it. On we had it to a certain degree, very limited, as Asli pointed out, but there was something there. There is still something there, but we are cutting down on it. And so that is the wrong direction. And for us, for example, trying to get universities in Germany to switch from this professor-focused system to what we call department-style system, is one of the many practical things we try to achieve. But it's yeah, it's work in progress. The other thing is the legal side of things. So as a union, we're obviously involved to a certain degree in the lawmaking process. And these whole, in the German context, a lot of the fixed term contracts for academics, especially for postdocs, works through this labor law, this extra labor law that exempts these people from the normal German labor law, which wouldn't allow for these kind of never-ending fixed-term contract nightmares. And we're trying to make our influence heard to reform this law and to limit it so that it is only pertaining to PhD students who are also working at universities, and also make it possible for the conditions to be a part of the collective bargaining agreements, because at the moment this law expressly prohibits us from discussing the conditions with the universities and with the Bundesländer, so the federal states as employers, to advance on what the law is providing. At the moment, we cannot do that. So these are specific points where we try to make headway. But as I said, at the moment, with the whole discourse we're standing against, it's a little bit of it's an uphill battle anyways, and sometimes it's more defending what's already there than getting ahead, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much.